Jim Gleason, who's going to come forward, and I think it's part 9. Is it 18 or 19?
18.
It's 18. 19 is next week. Jim is going to lead us in part 18 of the greatest story ever told. I'm really looking forward to it. God bless you. Amen. Amen. Time means nothing to these people. Amen.
Well, I am used to speaking to groups. This is the first time I've ever given a sermon, so be gentle. Gwen was telling me a story just earlier about something that happened over at King's this week, John. I don't know if you heard about it. 3 of the boys were talking, and the first one said, you know, my father scribbles on a piece of paper, and he calls it a poem, and they give him $50. And the second boy said, oh, well, my father scribbles on a piece of paper, and he calls it a song, and they give him $100. Joey defended you, John. He said, my father scribbles on a piece of paper, and he calls it a sermon, and it takes 4 people to collect all the money. He stood up for you, John. But I need to preface a little bit because I need your help. Back when I was in college, and I just realized it was over 50 years ago, I worked in the radio station, and we had a very popular program called the Academy of Music on Wednesday night. It was classical music. None of the people wanted to MC that show. And since it was the most popular one, I said, I'll do it. And so I got to read the libretto, mention the composer, the conductor. It was the most popular show. We got more mail and more calls about my emceeing because I so mispronounced those complex names. And so today, there's a couple of those there, and I need your help. Secondly, I come out of a Catholic background. Catholic background, as one comedian says, we pay our priests to read the Bible and tell us what it says. So we weren't encouraged to read the Bible. So this is kind of unusual for me to be preaching about the Bible. But I need your help because in putting it together and reviewing with John the other day, half the time when I mentioned Daniel, I use the word David. Don't ask me where that came from. So today, if I make that mistake, I need all of you to say, no, it's Daniel. Okay, so if I say David in the lion's den, you say, no, it's Daniel. All right, then that should work. The other thing I noticed, John, you know, look at your mentor and find out what he does right and do it good. And so he usually has, I'm going back over here, bottles of soda, right? I need a lot of help. Not just one, but many. That'll be part of the sermon. And so, let's go back and revisit our story, okay? A brief summary. We've come from Adam and Eve on up to the story of the tribe of Israel being split into 10 that moved to the north and 2, the tribe of Judah, in the south. And God ends up punishing them when they, in fact, start praying to statues and idols and allows them to be captured and taken away from their homelands. And so we saw the Assyrians taking over the tribe of Israel and taking it to Nineveh. And then where our story picks up today, we've got that happening in the south. Okay, we've got the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar capturing the tribe of Judah and taking them away. And so with that, let's read the scriptures. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord let King Jehoiakim of Judah fall into his power, as well as some of the vessels of the house of God. These he brought to the land of Shinar, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his gods. Then the king commanded his palace master, Ashpenaz, to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge, insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. They were to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal rations of food and wine. They were to be educated for 3 years, so that at the end of that time they could be stationed in the king's court. Among them was Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Asbury from the tribe of Judah. The palace master gave them other names. Daniel he called Belshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Asbury he called Abednego. At the end of the time the king had set for them to be brought in, the palace master brought them into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar. Let's pause there just for a minute. What's going on here? They've conquered the tribe of Judah, and the king is really trying to integrate the people of Judah into his country. And it's funny, when I read that, I thought of, John, your 4 boys. They fit some of the characteristics there, without defect, wise of their years, etc. And so you can imagine, in fact, they tell us these were teenagers. And so they brought them into the kingdom of Babylon, and the king is preparing them to serve in his kingdom. And so they're feeding them and getting them integrated into the whole concept. They're feeding them food that is contrary to their own religion. And so what we find is Daniel speaking up to the court officer, saying, "We won't eat this." Whoa. And the king said, "You're going to do it." The officer was afraid of himself, because if he doesn't do what the king told him to do, if these don't eat from the king's table, what's going to happen to him? But Daniel convinced him, said, "Give me 10 days. Give me just vegetables and water. And if that doesn't work, then we'll go from there." 10 days later, when the official reviews these 4, they're healthy, they're hearty, they're strong, they're better than the rest of those in this training camp who've been eating the rich foods. And so, when it comes before King Nebuchadnezzar, the king spoke with them. And among them all, no one was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they were stationed in the king's court. In every matter of wisdom and understanding concerning which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And so the story begins. And we find some interesting things happen. Now, let's go back to that name change just for a minute. Aaron, you know what Aaron means? What's your name mean?
Lightbringer.
What?
Lightbringer.
Lightbringer. Okay. When you went to Russia, did they have a different name for you?
Yeah.
What was it?
I don't know.
Spell it.
It was just A-R-O-N. Just, they stressed the O.
Oh, Aaron. And did that have a different meaning in Russian?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And so, in a very similar way, Aaron went to Russia to really get inculcated into their whole culture, to see what that was about. Okay, not as a slave, and he was able to come home when he wanted to, okay? But they changed his name over there to match that. And in fact, when we look at the names that were changed, you might say to yourself, why did they change the names? They were inculcate them into the Babylonian culture. So the names, for example, Daniel's name in Hebrew means, God is my judge. It was changed to Belteshazzar, which in Babylonian means, Bel, protect his life. Now, Bel is their chief Babylonian god. Right? Hananiah means, the Lord shows grace. It was changed to Shadrach, which means, under the command of Aku. That's the moon god in Babylon. Mishael means who is like God. It was changed to Meshach, who is like Aku, again, that moon god. Azariah, the Lord helps, to Abednego, servant of Nebu, the god of learning and writing. And so we see things happening here. We see both the upper story and the lower story. And then how does that apply to us here today? And so as we go through some of the stories that are in the book of Daniel, That's what we're going to do. Take a look at what's going on, the man's story, the lower story, what God's doing in the upper story, and how that applies to our life here today. And so from that perspective, God's punishing Judah for their disobedience, but as we said before, still loving his children, even though their time outlasted 70 years, and staying true to his promise to always be with them. And even then, he promised that the Savior would come from their tribe. There are such demonstrations we can lead the world. He's leading the world to see the one true God. How does that apply to us today? God is forever patient with his children, including us today. We may dishonor him or disobey, and even with an I'm sorry repentance repeatedly, failing yet again, he still loves us. He used our lives and his love to allow others to see that he is the one true God. Keeping that in mind, we ask ourselves, how can we act in our everyday lives, even while in exile here on earth, waiting to return to the New Jerusalem, our true home? And so the story goes on, and King Nebuchadnezzar is disturbed with some dreams he has. He comes to his entourage of magicians and enchanters and wise people, and he wants them to interpret the dream for him. Now, he's a pretty sharp guy. I mean, these guys have been fooling around all along, you know, oh, tell us the dream and we'll tell you what it means, right? So the king changes it this time. You tell me my dream, and then tell me what it means. Oh, but king, you know, we can't do that. You got to tell us what the dream is. Either you tell me what my dream is, or you're fakes, and I will kill you. Whoa, you're getting pretty serious about this. Now, picture Daniel and his three friends thinking about this. Daniel prays to God. None of the wise people are coming up with it. And God gives him the insight to that dream. And so he finally goes back to, as they order all these people to be killed, he says, wait a minute. Bring me to the king. He goes to the king, and he tells the king exactly the dream that he dreamed, and interprets it for him. And the result is that's the lower story. That's what's really going on at this level. But then we see what's happening in the upper story. And from that perspective, we read in Daniel 46, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering of incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and revealers of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. So that's the upper story. How does that apply to us today? The story of Daniel and his friends is really more like ours than some other stories we covered. In 1 Peter we read, where our story begins to unfold, he identifies Christians as strangers in the world. Daniel's hometown was Jerusalem, and our hometown is the New Jerusalem, which Jesus is constructing for followers of Christ. Peter says we are aliens and strangers in the world. And Jesus tells us to be in the world, but not of the world. And so Peter tells us exactly how to do that. First, be careful to not get sucked into the lifestyle of the world. And secondly, live a life that points others to God. We are meant to be leaders of others to his life. And so the stories continue, and they all fall into the same purpose, the upper and lower stories. And so the king at some point in time builds an idol. Now, how high is this, would you say? 20 feet? 30 feet? Okay, this idol is built 90 feet tall. Guy got quite an ego, doesn't he? And so everybody is called upon to worship this idol. Now, the three friends, okay, resist. And in the lower story, we hear them respond when they're pulled before the king as saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we were thrown into the blazing furnace, which is the threat he's made, the God we serve is able to save us from it. He's able to. And he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But, this is where they're coming from now, right? But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set before us. The three are bound and thrown into the hottest furnace they could make. It is so hot that even the soldiers that threw them in were burned and killed. And the king all of a sudden realizes, wait a minute, there's movement in the furnace. And he looks, and there are 4 figures moving in the furnace, not being burned. He turns to his court and said, didn't we put in 3? Who's the 4th? Why are they still alive? And so, with that faith in God, God in his upper story allows the lower story to prove that he is there for them. The 4th person is interpreted as being a pre-incarnate Jesus who came to be with the 3 young men. And so we see in the upper story the response the king has to that. And these are years apart, and so you have this roller coaster ride of being faithful and then back to worshiping idols and things of that nature, such as a 90-foot idol. And so then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way. Again, what's that do for us today? With the world's everyday threats of unpopularity and following the crowd, sometimes even death, as we've seen in school shootings and daily news of murders, violence, how do we follow the example of these 3 courageous young men in facing such challenges? Imagine, they're teenagers, or they were when it started anyway. What would you and I do if faced with a terror or a shooter in the situations like Connecticut school we recently, and all too often in recent years, have heard in all too vivid news videos? Would we, like them, have the courage to stand in the way of a gun to protect a loved one or others, as a young teacher did at the risk of death? It would never happen to us, would it? But I'm sure that the players in those situations left home that day with the same belief it would never happen to them. I'm just going in to teach my kids in school. And next thing you know, you find out your faith is challenged in a way you never would have expected, just like it was back in the days of Daddy. Now, you don't get that faith at the moment of the challenge. It comes from all the little things that happen in your lives leading up to that, the small things. So God reminds us that our life here is only a passage to life with him. With that in mind, does each action seem less threatening? In other words, if you found yourself in that spot, it's not the end. That's the beauty of the faith we have. This life is temporary, and we have something better waiting for us. And so if you were to face that, hopefully that would be the first thought you would have, and realize, beyond the fear, the faith and belief and courage that comes from our faith in God. And so we go even further now. We have the other story that everybody knows, even an ex-Catholic like myself. Not having read the Bible, I know these stories of the furnace and the lion's den. It's that popular. And in the lower story, we find the king. He's a different king now, King Darius, who had conquered the Babylonians. And Daniel defies the king's decree, which says, you will only pray to their God. And Daniel continues to pray in an open window to cadre of leaders in Babylonia that, in fact, he has been raised above because of his relationship with the king and for his wisdom. And so they don't like him. You've probably seen that in your work environments. You may have seen it in your communities. And so the others turn against him and try and find fault with what he's done, trying to find some dirt. Think of a political election, huh? A campaign. But they can't find anything. And so they convince the king to put out an edict that cannot be withdrawn, that says, if anyone fails to pray when the bells ring, they will be put into a den of hungry lions. Daniel resists and is put before the king. The king likes Daniel, so he's got a problem. He really likes this young man. He's been a good friend with him, lots of wisdom. But there's nothing he can do. The law is the law. Once he's made that decree, you can't withdraw it. And so he finds himself in the mode of Daniel standing in front of him, saying no. And he has to put him into the lion's den and block up the hole so that he's left there overnight to be eaten by these hungry lions. The king can't even sleep that night. The next morning, he can't wait to get back and see what happened. There's Daniel, just fine. God has closed the mouths of the lions. And he ends up throwing others in there, and Daniel survives. But again, on the upper story, what happens is, the king again, this King Darius now, he wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language throughout the land. May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And so, again, what's that mean for us today? We are aliens in exile. In fact, think about it. Sort of like this. Your ancestors came to this country as aliens. They moved from where they were known, they knew everything, often escaping persecution, and came to this country. And they often tried to retain their own culture here, gathering in close communities, forming their own churches for that nationality. And so today it's not much different. You're in a world, but we're being admonished here, don't become of that world. Don't fall into the trap of becoming like everything around us. We live in the world, but not the of the world, living lives honoring God, as Daniel and his friends did in Babylon, even before or under dire threats of fire and hungry lions back then. That means living each day according to God's plan, not falling into the world's temptations in everyday actions. There are so many examples of what that means in our everyday lives, from the extreme life-threatening challenges described before, to the everyday simple ones. For those doing business, do you pad that expense account just a little bit? No. Not if you're true to your God. To file an honest tax return and not claim that extra deduction that you're not due. Or, in a more simple way, the other day I went to Rite Aid and I bought 6 packs. And I said to the cashier, I've got 2 here. One was right there in the basket visible, and one on the counter. When I got into the car, I realized she hadn't charged me for 2. She only charged me for 1. Hey, not my fault. I told her. Hey, I drove off. It's been a long week preparing this sermon. I couldn't give the sermon without driving back to that Rite Aid yesterday and surprising a cashier by saying, please charge me for a 6-pack of soda that somebody made a mistake last week on. Oh, thank you. So I can honestly stand here and say, it's a good example, and I can give it to you honestly. But it's the simple things like that in our everyday lives make the difference. It's those that will give you the strength that when that unforeseen challenge comes, whatever it may be, and I hope it's never something like we were talking about before with a gun in your face and have to protect somebody else. But by building on those small everyday examples, we can be strong as we move on to return to our New Jerusalem. So while the lower story is obvious, we need to act like and live God's upper story in our everyday lives, especially little things, so we will have Daniel's courage and persistence when it comes to the big ones someday. So in summary, as we go back to work or everyday life, we need to know that Jesus is with us. Matthew 28:19-20 says, Jesus is with us to the end of the age, which refers to the time when he comes back the second time to take us to the New Jerusalem. Jesus is telling us that as we go into the world this week, we need to live for him courageously, like Daniel and his friends did in the stories we just heard. We need to align our lives to his upper story, so we can be courageous and strong because he will go into the furnace with us. We are not alone. Clearly, we need to live in this world and not be of this world. Let us pray. Dear God, please help us to be your loving children, courageous with strong belief in your undying love and constant forgiveness. Let us see in our everyday life challenges, hopefully not facing a fiery sermon or hungry lion, but in equally frightening events of tragedies, cancers, accidents, loss of loved ones, foreclosure, or so many modern trials that happen here in the lower story. Seeing them in the light of your upper story, help us to live our lives in service of bringing others to come to know and love you as their loving God, as you have blessed us with your love for and faith in you. Amen. John, thank you for this opportunity. And Pam, I couldn't have done this without the research she's been doing for the story all along, and it was all right there. And so thank you.
All of God's people said, Amen. Good word. Good word. I remember years ago, I was about 17, 18, and there was a guy, I was just hanging out with a couple of my friends, and the guy there was obviously drunk. And he's friend of a police officer in Spotswood near East Brunswick. It's where my church was. And he was kind of blowing smoke. The people I was with didn't take it that seriously, but I just couldn't live with that knowledge without, he said it was, so-and-so police officer, he was going to kill him, and I lived with it like the soda thing, for like a day. And I just had to go when, into the little police department. They knew exactly, who I was telling them about, and they thanked me, the officers thanked me profusely for giving them that information. Whether it's something little or whether it's something big, how does God call us to be different? Because we're his followers. Let's each of us take that question and that calling with us this day. Please rise. Let's sing together, where he leads me, I will follow. When I